As always, thank you for your time. Today we're going to start the first part of one of the most complicated subjects that's been really difficult to put together in the last year. It's what Rene Izquierdo refers to as engagement. Um, the challenges with this portion, I think, are twofold. Rene is actually very self-aware of how he moves and very good at explaining it. And he does know some anatomy and physiology language. He's even, looked at some of the same material I have to put together this series and this one day, hopefully, book. But there is a difference. There's certain things I think that he's intuited and forgot. Either learned and intuited, and it's hard to describe, or like he learned it so long ago he forgot. I also think there's some times where he lumps multiple different movements or things that are going on into one word. Like, as I think you'll see, like engagement is actually a bunch of different stuff. And then, for as much as he's self-aware of how he moves and knows some of the anatomy and physiology vocabulary. There are times where we're talking in the video, and he'll say, "Oh, I move like this," and I don't. And he might even say, "I don't move like that." And then you watch him, and he moves a couple different ways at once, and one of them is exactly the way I said he was. And so all this is like, I really know this anatomy and physiology material, and unlike him, where he learned it intuitively through self-observation, I learned all this anatomy and physiology first, and then applied it to this problem. And so I say all that to say that while Rene is certainly a gift to the instrument and has helped me out a lot, I think one of the biggest challenges over the last year has been kind of piecing all this together. I think you'll find, as you watch both my video series on this subject and then the videos, I basically edited all of our video conversation about this subject over the weekend, and we'll be posting that so you can kind of think of it like math. You're going to be able to check my work. So you're going to see all my explanations. You're going to get to see the conversations you'll have, and I think you'll understand where I'm coming from and see a lot of what I'm seeing and understand a lot of what I'm saying. So the first thing that we need to discuss with engagement is tone and volume. And so we're going to start with tone because engagement has an impact on tone. And in order to understand that, we have to understand the way that tone works. And tone is a byproduct of what we call harmonics. And for those of you very familiar with harmonics, if you have an engineering background especially, I'm super oversimplifying things to only what you need to know. When we think of pitch, meaning different notes that sound different, E, B, G, D, that's vibrations per second. But when we think of tone, meaning why does a flute sound like a flute, a guitar sound like a guitar, or different guitars like in a classical and a steel string or a dobro, why do they sound different from one another? That has to do with what's called the harmonic series. And the way I would think of the harmonic series, oversimplifying, is that it's kind of like the string or column of air is vibrating at a bunch of different pitches at once. And you can emphasize, either through how you construct an instrument or how you play an instrument, or both, obviously, you can emphasize different ranges of the harmonic series. You can emphasize the highs, you can emphasize the mids, you can emphasize the lows, which not accidentally is what you see most of the tone knobs on your typical guitar amp. And to the degree that you can emphasize the highs, mids, or lows through either the way you construct the instrument or how you play it, you end up with the tone of the instrument. So I want to just give a couple quick examples. So one would be like a flute. The reason the flute sounds different than a guitar is that one, it's a column of air vibrating, and two, the flute is made of metal material, whereas the guitar is made of wood. The guitar does have a body of air inside the body, or a cavity, but it's not a column of air in metal, it's in wood. And so that difference in material, the flute being metal, is going to lead to a little bit brighter tone than a guitar. I should say, I am not an expert on the subject. My speculation would be that the metal yields a little bit brighter sound, and the column of air yields a little bit warmer sound, and those two kind of get you a nice middle ground, because obviously the flute isn't super brittle or bright sounding. The other example that I like to give when I talk about tone construction would be the difference between, say, a nylon guitar and a steel string and a dobro. A dobro is going to be the brightest because it's got steel strings, which are metal, which tend to emphasize the higher frequencies, relatively speaking, in terms of highs, mids, and lows. But the dobro also has a metal resonator right in the center. And that metal metallic material is going to give you a brighter, more metallic sound. The steel string is going to sit in the middle of the classical guitar and the dobro relatively, because while it has steel strings, everything else is wood. And then the classical guitar, having both nylon strings, which tend to have a really warm, mellow sound, and a construction that emphasizes a warm, mellow sound, is going to be on the darker, mellower, warmer side. Now, last example I'll give is, it's messy, because, for example, I said nylon strings tend to have a warmer sound. Well, I have the same nylon strings on my classical, as I do on my flamenco, but the design of that instrument has a much brighter sound, and there can also be a percussive element too, because not only is the flamenco brighter, but it's also punchier. When I say punchier, I mean like the difference between like the thud of this soft chair versus like the real sharp attack of like hard wood. That's what I mean by percussive. That flamenco's is a little bit tighter, punchier, like the difference between a snare and a floor tom. And you can actually see this on the guitar in a way that's hard to do on other instruments. There's two different ways. One is you can actually isolate some of these harmonics. So for example, if I want to go one octave up, I go halfway to the string. I can also get a couple different pitches. So you can actually isolate and hear all these different harmonics. The other thing that you can do is, as I said earlier, you can emphasize different ranges. I don't really think you can emphasize specific harmonic. You can definitely emphasize ranges. So if I want to emphasize the highs, as an example, I can play Ponticello really near the bridge. You get a really bright sound. Or I can emphasize the lows and get a really mellow, warm sound. Or I can emphasize the mids, which kind of gets me a mix of both. And the guitar is actually a mid-range instrument, meaning it's not playing really low frequencies like a bass. It's not playing really high frequencies like a piccolo or all the way to the right on the piano. And so you get a nice balance of both. You play somewhere kind of around this area in relation to the sound hole, which is not too low and not too bright. The other way that you can experience this is through your wrist alignment. So for example, when you're coming at an oblique angle with the strings, meaning that in free stroke, as an example, or with the, I should say with the wrist aligned with the forearm, you come to the string at an oblique angle, and so you get a lot of flesh and nail. So you get this soft flesh and this nail, and kind of like in the same way that when you're Ponticello or flesh, if
Hey, just need to make a quick audio edit. I should have said there Ponticello or Dolce. Ponticello being close to the bridge, Dolce being close, or I should say over the neck and fretboard. Back to the main event.
you emphasize a lot of nail, you get a brighter sound, kind of like Ponticello. And if you had no nails and you emphasize just flesh, you get a mellower sound. And if you find a mix of the two, like in the modern oblique angle alignment to the strings, you get a mix of both, and so you get kind of like playing in the center. You get a mix of warm from the flesh and bright from the nail. And so you get this sound. And I'm going to actually play with a chord too. Now, in the old school, let's say Segovia, Lagoya, Ida Presti, people from like 1955 and beforehand, they played with a deviated wrist towards the pinky and then slightly flexed. So they kind of just let it hang with gravity rather than holding it or aligning it with gravity the way the Rene school and the modern school does. And the reason they did this was a couple of reasons. One, they didn't want to hold the hand up. And two, they played with a more rest stroke driven technique. And as we talked about in the prior video, and are going to in a subsequent video, we're going to revisit that again. In order to play rest stroke, it's more effective when you're playing at a perpendicular angle, so you can cut right through the string, although there are cases where you can play, and we've discussed this, rest stroke at an oblique angle. And then the third reason had to do with tone. And part of it was a byproduct of this alignment, but also, if you think back then, they were really trying to play in a concert hall in the way the guitar hadn't been played as much, but the way a lot of other instruments and ensembles were playing in the larger concert hall. And that's kind of what Segovia made famous, is doing all this concert hall touring and making the guitar accepted in that context. And so part of the benefit of playing in that more oblique angle is that you got more nail and less flesh, and so you tended to emphasize those higher frequencies. So I played an oblique angle, get a nice mix of warmth and bright. If I played an oblique angle and you just get flesh, some of those lows and mids get removed and you get a brighter sound.
Hey, just need to make a quick audio edit. I said just a second ago that when you deviated towards the pinky and played in a more rest stroke driven approach, that was an oblique angle. Obviously you can see it, but it's now the
tip and nail are at a perpendicular angle to the string. And when you do that, I said you get more flesh. The whole point of the oblique angle is to get more flesh. The point of the perpendicular angle is to get less flesh and more nail contact, which yields a brighter sound. All right, back to the main recording.
And that brighter sound tends to cut over other warmer instruments. So like if you're playing with a bass, think of like a jazz bass and guitar, or you think of like a guitarist playing with an ensemble of cello and violin, or maybe playing concerto with an orchestra, or if you're just trying to, we tend to hear higher frequencies as being like louder and more, they tend to cut through things more for us. So if you're trying, even if you're just trying to project as a solo guitar, the idea behind it at the time was that that bright sound would help the instrument project in a large concert hall. I don't have a strong opinion on this one way or the other, but there seems to be the sense that over time, you know, if you look at the GFA from the last 15, 20 years, people have moved to that more oblique angle and neutral zone aligned wrist in the center of its range of motion. And there seems to be a consensus that the technique, that this technique can produce a sound well enough for modern classical guitar playing in concert hall environments. So what we're going to end on now is kind of unpacking that. Why is it that the modern school has shifted to a more oblique angle with the wrist aligned in the center of its range of motion? How is that gaining a sound that is commensurate with that older technique and works in a modern concert hall environment? And I think there's a couple of reasons for it, based on my conversations with Renee and studying all the different books and my own experiences in this research project. I think one is that when you come at that oblique angle and you get flesh and nail, there's more finger pushing the string down and into the soundboard. In addition to that, it comes through the string at like an angle, and so that angle also contributes to the fact that it has to go through. If you were going oblique, you'd just be kind of scratching the string, whereas
Again, another quick edit. That was perpendicular, not oblique. Back to the main recording.
Become oblique, it's like it has to go up the ramp of the nail and the fingertip and then out. And so both of those things help push the string further into the soundboard and give it more sound. But the last thing that Renee makes very clear in what he calls engagement is that you're using the shoulder to arm joint and this sort of seesaw movement to help give you more volume. And I'm going to exaggerate it a little bit, but if we were to pluck chords, this is just finger. I'm going to try to use as much finger as I can. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to press in. So I'm going to do the seesaw motion. I'm just going to kind of help it press in a bit. And I'm exaggerating, but you'll hear how that tool of pressing in, and it's not like bouncing, it's like pressing in. I mean, there might be a little tiny bit of bounce to it, but it's really more pressing. So you can try that yourself, and you can see how you're pressing in. And you can do it on one note as well. So this is just a finger on the high E string. Now I'm going to press in. Now engagement. So you can see I'm kind of lowering in and getting more sound. And it's something that might not come as well in this camera and its speakers, but if you try this yourself, you're going to hear it. It's not subtle. And then the last thing that we need to talk about in relation to this is setup and how Renee sets up the guitar and how that affects the instrument. Now, regardless of how whether you see someone using a footstool or some sort of support, or in my case, I've started using a guitar strap. What you've seen over the last 20 years of the GFA is the angle go from that Segovia style, where the neck is more perpendicular to the body, to being more raised, and also the guitar tilted backwards. And this is something Renee emphasizes very much in the videos that I'm going to post later on in Menai Conversing, which is that the guitar is tilted back. And that positioning lets you do a couple of things. One, it makes it easier to get around the side of the guitar. Because if you're say sitting like Paco de Lucia, obviously Paco can play very well, and I can't tell you that he's playing it correctly. But if you look, he's really got to reach around the instrument to get to it. And you can experience that yourself if you try it. Now he leans forward and is able to engage using that.
Hey, quick audio edit. So you'll see this when I post the conversations of Renee and I talking about this, but Renee is the one who says that he leans forward. If you look at the way I'm sitting, like if you rewind this and just rewatch it again, you can see that the guitar is tilted back. So whether or not Paco de Lucia does that, I haven't really had time to check a camera angle to see. But obviously you can sit in that cross-legged posture and tilt the guitar back and accommodate that posture. So just wanted to add that little audio splice. Back to the main video.
Seesaw displacement type and make it work, but nonetheless, it is harder to do it this way. Like you see him sitting in that cross-legged posture that he does. You'll see him switch from being at a more oblique angle for chords, like doing this motion, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more in the next video. So part of the sitting position is to help you reach around. Another part of it is that to a certain degree you're falling onto the strings and gravity is helping you get some of that sound, versus when it's more perpendicular to you, like you can't really use gravity to let the weight fall into the strings. And the last thing about this angle is that if you look, there's space between the back of the guitar and the body. And so when the strings vibrate, those strings get transmitted to the bridge to the top vibrates, that vibrates the cavity of air in the guitar, that bounces off the back of the guitar, which vibrates, and because it's not touching my body, it can vibrate more, and then it bounces back and gets focused through the sound hole and projected to the audience. And if you also look, this angle tilts it upwards a little bit. So if you think of a concert hall, the seats are going to go gradually upwards, and there might even be like an upper balcony. And so you're kind of angling the guitar at the angle of the concert hall. And so all those things come together to help project. And that is the volume and tone portion of how engagement works. In the next video, we're going to discuss engagement in terms of speed. And you can use engagement for speed or volume or both. And so we're going to unpack the speed part of it in the next video. Thank you for your time.